The desert wind carried death that morning, and 6 elite Navy SEALs knew their number was up. Pinned down in a rocky outcrop with Taliban fighters closing in from 3 sides, ammunition running dangerously low, and no extraction in sight, Team Bravo had exhausted every option in their tactical playbook. The enemy had them dead to rights, and everyone knew it. Then, impossibly, Taliban fighters began dropping one by one from distances that defied explanation. No musliflas, no sound signature, just precision death delivered from somewhere in the endless Afghan wilderness. The SEALs had never seen anything like it, and neither had their enemies. What happened next would challenge everything these battle-hardened warriors thought they knew about warfare, friendship, and the ghosts that walk among us in the world's most dangerous places. This is the true story of how a legend was born in the mountains of Afghanistan, and how 6 men learned that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. The grass moves differently when a phantom walks through it, and on that day, the grass was very much alive. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez felt the first prickle of unease as their convoy approached the village of Costa Feroza. After 3 tours in Afghanistan, he had developed an almost supernatural sense for trouble, and every instinct was screaming warnings as their 3 Humvees navigated the narrow mountain road. The morning sun cast long shadows across the valley, creating a checkerboard of light and darkness that could hide 1,000 enemies. "Something's not right," Rodriguez muttered into his radio, his weathered hands gripping his M4 carbine. At 32, he was the oldest member of SEAL Team Bravo, a compact unit of 6 men who had been operating in this region for the past 4 months. His dark eyes swept the ridgelines above them, searching for the telltale glint of metal or the unnatural stillness that marked a sniper's hide. Lieutenant Jake Morrison, their team leader, acknowledged the warning with a curt nod. At 28, Morrison had already earned a reputation as one of the most capable officers in Naval Special Warfare Command. His blonde hair was bleached almost white by the Afghan sun, and his blue eyes held the kind of calm intensity that made men follow him into hell without question. "I see it too," Morrison replied quietly. "Hassan, what's your read on the village?" Petty Officer First Class Hassan al-Mahmoud, their intelligence specialist and the only team member who spoke fluent Pashto, lowered his binoculars with a troubled expression. His Lebanese heritage had proven invaluable in building relationships with local informants, but today those same instincts that helped him navigate cultural nuances were telling him they were walking into a trap. "Too quiet, sir," Hassan reported. "Market day should have the place buzzing with activity. I count maybe 6 civilians, all male, all military age. No children, no women, no animals. This feels like a setup." The convoy slowed as they approached the village outskirts. Their intelligence suggested that a high-value Taliban commander named Mullah Fazullah was hiding somewhere in this area, possibly using the village as a safe house. The mission parameters were straightforward: locate, capture, or eliminate the target, and extract before enemy reinforcements could respond. But as Rodriguez watched the empty streets through his scope, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were the ones being hunted. Corpsman Second Class Tommy Chun, their medic, shifted nervously in the passenger seat of the lead vehicle. At 24, Chun was the youngest member of the team, but his steady hands and unflappable demeanor under fire had saved more lives than he could count. His parents had emigrated from Taiwan when he was 10, and he carried their work ethic and attention to detail into everything he did. "Movement on the rooftops," Chun reported, his voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through his system. "Multiple positions, but they're staying back from the edges. Professional discipline." Morrison made the decision that would save their lives, even as it led them into 12 hours of hell. "All vehicles, halt. We going on foot from here. Rodriguez, take point. Hassan, you're with me. Chun, Williams, and Parker, you take overwatch positions and cover our approach." Sergeant First Class David Williams, their explosives expert, grinned as he checked his demolitions kit. Williams was a transplant from Georgia who spoke with a slow drawl that belied his lightning-fast reflexes and encyclopedic knowledge of anything that went boom. His lanky frame and easy smile made him popular with locals, but Taliban fighters had learned to fear the sight of his signature black baseball cap. Finally, some real work, Williams said, slapping a fresh magazine into his weapon. I was starting to think this was going to be another milk run. Petty Officer Second Class Anthony Parker, their communications specialist, was already establishing contact with their forward operating base. Parker was built like a linebacker, with the kind of thick New York accent that never seemed to fit with his baby face and earnest demeanor. He had joined the Navy to escape the streets of Brooklyn, and he approached every mission with the intensity of someone who had something to prove. Overwatch, this is Team Bravo. Parker spoke into his radio. Beginning village approach. Requesting immediate backup if things go sideways. The response was not what they wanted to hear. Team Bravo, nearest support is 45 minutes out. Weather's grounding air support for the next 2 hours. You're on your own until further notice. Morrison absorbed this information without changing expression, but Rodriguez caught the slight tightening around his commander's eyes. They were operating in one of the most dangerous regions of Afghanistan, with no backup and no extraction available. It was exactly the kind of situation that turned routine missions into disasters. The team moved with the fluid precision that came from months of working together under fire. Rodriguez took point, his movements careful and deliberate as he navigated the rocky terrain leading into the village. Hassan moved parallel to him, constantly scanning for signs of civilian activity or enemy movement. Morrison followed 20 meters behind, coordinating with the Overwatch team through hand signals. Chun, Williams, and Parker had positioned themselves on a small rise overlooking the village, their scopes trained on different sectors to provide early warning of any threats. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional whisper of wind through the mountain passes. "This is wrong," Rodriguez said quietly as they reached the village outskirts. "Even if they cleared out the civilians, there should be dogs, chickens, something. This place feels like a graveyard." Hassan was studying the building layouts with the eye of someone who had grown up in similar villages. "The compound structures are all wrong, too. Those aren't family homes. Look at the reinforced walls, the strategic positioning. Someone's been preparing this place for a fight." Morrison was beginning to understand the scope of the trap they were walking into, but they had come too far to turn back now. Their intelligence indicated that Mullah Fazullah was responsible for at least 3 IED attacks that had killed American soldiers in the past month. If they could eliminate him, it would save lives and disrupt Taliban operations in the region. "We adapt and overcome," Morrison decided. Rodriguez, Hassan, we go building to building. Slow and methodical. If this is a trap, we spring it on our terms. The first building they entered appeared to be a traditional Afghan home, but the walls were much thicker than normal, and the windows had been modified to provide better defensive positions. Hassan found evidence that the building had been recently occupied, including warm cooking fires and prayer rugs still arranged for morning prayers. "They knew we were coming," Hassan reported. "Question is, how long ago did they clear out? And where did they go?" The answer came in the form of rifle fire from 3 different directions simultaneously. The Taliban fighters had waited until the SEAL team was deep inside the village before springing their ambush, and they had positioned themselves with the skill of professional soldiers rather than a regular militia. Rodriguez dove for cover behind a mud brick wall as bullets chewed chunks from the structure inches from his head. Contact. Multiple shooters, at least 6 positions. Morrison was already moving, his mind automatically calculating angles of fire and potential escape routes. Chun, Williams, Parker, we need immediate suppression fire on the northeast compound. The Overwatch team responded instantly, their precision shooting forcing several Taliban fighters to duck behind cover. But more enemy positions were revealing themselves with every passing second, and it was becoming clear that Team Bravo had walked into a carefully planned killing zone. "Sir, we've got movement on the ridgelines too," Parker reported through the radio. Looks like they're trying to flank our overwatch position. Williams was already preparing charges to blow their way through the back wall of their current position. Give me 30 seconds, and I can get us a new exit. But Hassan was counting muzzle flashes and calculating the enemy force strength with growing alarm. We're looking at least 20 fighters, probably more. They got us triangulated, and they're moving to cut off all our escape routes. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. The Taliban fighters were displaying a level of tactical coordination that suggested extensive training and planning. They had studied American small unit tactics, and they were using that knowledge to systematically eliminate every advantage that Team Bravo normally possessed. Rodriguez found himself thinking about his wife Maria back in San Diego, and their two young daughters who barely understood why Daddy had to keep going to the place with all the sand and mountains. He had promised Maria this would be his last deployment, that he would put in his 20 years and retire to become a high school coach somewhere safe and boring. The irony wasn't lost on him that he might not live to see that peaceful retirement. Morrison was working his radio, trying to coordinate with their Overwatch team while simultaneously directing return fire at the closest Taliban positions. Base, this is Team Bravo. We are in immediate need of extraction. Heavy contact, outnumbered at least 3-1. The response was frustratingly predictable. Team Bravo, extraction assets still weathered in. Estimate 2 hours before we can get birds in the air. 2 hours might as well have been 2 days. Their current ammunition supply would last maybe 20 minutes of sustained firefight, and the Taliban seemed to have endless reserves of fighters moving into position around them. Hassan had found a position where he could observe the enemy movements, and what he saw made his blood run cold. They're not just trying to kill us. They're herding us towards something specific. Look at the pattern of their fire. They're deliberately leaving us one escape route. Morrison studied the tactical situation and realized Hassan was right. The Taliban fighters were professional enough to have killed them all in the initial ambush if that had been their goal. Instead, they were applying pressure to force Team Bravo toward a specific location. It's another trap, Morrison concluded. They want us alive, probably for propaganda purposes. That compound to the west is where they're trying to push us. Williams had finished preparing his charges, but he hesitated before detonating them. If we blow this wall, we're going to be moving exactly where they want us to go. And if we stay here, we die when our ammunition runs out, Rodriguez pointed out pragmatically. At least if we move, we control the timing. Chun was treating a grazed wound on Hassan's arm while keeping his rifle ready for the next wave of attacks. His medical training had taught him to think in terms of triage and resource management, and right now their resources were running dangerously low. We need to break contact and find a defensive position we can hold until extraction arrives, Chun said. This urban environment is working against us. Parker was monitoring Taliban radio chatter through his intercept equipment, and the intelligence he was gathering was deeply troubling. They're calling this Operation American Trophy. Sounds like they've been planning this for weeks, maybe months. The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. Team Bravo hadn't stumbled into a random ambush. They had been specifically targeted, their movements tracked, and their mission parameters somehow compromised. The intelligence that had led them to this village had been carefully crafted bait, designed to lure them into a predetermined killing zone. Morrison made the decision that would define the next 12 hours of their lives. We fight our way to the ridgeline, open terrain where we can use our training advantage, and see them coming. Williams, blow us a hole. Rodriguez, Hassan, you're with me. We move fast, and we move together. The explosive charges detonated with a thunderous crack that echoed through the mountain valley, creating a cloud of dust and debris that provided momentary concealment. Team Bravo moved through the breach like ghosts, their years of training taking over as they advanced toward what they hoped would be more defensible terrain. But the Taliban fighters had anticipated this move as well, and they were waiting with a crossfire that forced the SEALs to dive for cover behind a low stone wall barely 50 meters from their previous position. They had gained almost nothing, and their ammunition situation was becoming critical. Chun, Williams, Parker, can you reach our position? Morrison called into his radio. Parker's voice came back tense with strain. Negative, sir. They've got us pinned down pretty good up here. Every time we move, they light us up from multiple directions. The team was being systematically separated and isolated, exactly what their training had taught them to never allow. Hassan was bleeding more heavily than Chun had initially assessed, and Rodriguez was nursing a twisted ankle from their rapid movement through the debris. Morrison checked his ammunition and realized they had maybe 10 minutes of fighting capability left at their current rate of fire. After that, they would be reduced to pistols and whatever grenades remained in their kit. This is how it ends, Rodriguez said quietly, not really talking to anyone in particular. 3 tours, and it ends in some godforsaken village whose name I can't even pronounce. But Hassan was studying something in the distance that didn't make sense. Movement on the far ridgeline. Single individual moving through the tall grass. Could be a spotter for indirect fire. Morrison raised his binoculars and tried to track the movement Hassan had spotted. The grass was thick and golden brown, swaying in a mountain breeze, making it almost impossible to distinguish between natural movement and human activity. Then he saw it, a figure moving with impossible stealth through the vegetation, someone who understood the art of fieldcraft better than anyone Morrison had ever encountered. The individual was still too far away to identify, but something about their movement pattern suggested military training at the highest level. Could be one of ours, Morrison said hopefully. Maybe special operations we weren't briefed about. Rodriguez was more skeptical. In this area, without coordination, more likely it's their sniper moving to a better position to finish us off. The Taliban fire was intensifying as more fighters moved into position around their small perimeter. Williams was rationing his remaining explosives, saving them for a final desperate breakout attempt that they all knew was likely to be suicidal. Chin was doing what he could for Hassan's wound, but his medical supplies were limited and the constant incoming fire made it impossible to provide proper treatment. We need to move him soon, or he's going to go into shock. Parker's voice crackled over the radio with a note of desperation. Sir, I count at least 30 enemy fighters now, and more arriving every few minutes. Whatever we're going to do, we need to do it fast. Morrison was out of options and running out of time. His men were counting on him to find a way out of an impossible situation, but every tactical assessment led to the same conclusion. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped in enemy territory with no support available. He was preparing to give the order for a final desperate assault when the impossible happened. The first Taliban fighter dropped without warning, his body crumpling to the ground with no accompanying sound of gunfire. Morrison blinked, thinking he had imagined it, but then another enemy fighter fell, and then another. Someone was killing Taliban fighters from impossible distances with weapons that made no sound and left no visible signature. What the hell? Rodriguez whispered, watching through his scope as confusion spread through the enemy ranks. Hassan raised his head despite his wound, tried to understand what was happening. That's not possible. The range has to be over 800 meters, and I don't hear any shots. Morrison was watching the tall grass on the far ridgeline, and now he could see the figure moving with deliberate purpose from position to position. Whoever it was, they were systematically eliminating Taliban fighters with the kind of precision that bordered on supernatural. Ghost shooter, Williams said quietly. I've heard stories, but I never believed them. The Taliban fighters were beginning to panic as their numbers dwindled with each passing minute. They had gone from hunters to hunted, and they had no idea where the threat was coming from. Some were firing wildly at the ridgeline, but their shots were falling hundreds of meters short of their target. Chin was staring in amazement as enemy fighters continued to drop without explanation. Whoever that is, they just saved our lives. But Morrison was studying the tactical situation with growing unease. The mysterious sniper was incredibly effective, but the Taliban still had overwhelming numbers, and they were beginning to adapt to the new threat by taking better cover and coordinating their movements. "Don't get comfortable," Morrison warned his team. "We're still outnumbered, and this guy can't kill them all." Rodriguez was trying to establish radio contact with their mysterious benefactor, cycling through various military frequencies without success. "Whoever you are, if you can hear this, Team Bravo is grateful for the assist." There was no response, but the deadly precision shooting continued, each shot perfectly placed to maximum tactical effect. The Taliban fighters who had been so confident minutes before were now huddled behind inadequate cover, afraid to expose themselves long enough to maintain their assault. Hassan was regaining some strength as Chun worked on his wound, and his tactical mind was analyzing their new situation. "We need to use this opportunity to reach better defensive positions. That shooter can't maintain this rate of fire indefinitely." Morrison agreed, but he was reluctant to leave the relative safety of their current position without knowing more about their mysterious ally. "Parker, can you reach the Overwatch team?" "Working on it, sir," Parker replied, his voice strained with effort. "The Taliban are still keeping us pretty busy up here, but the pressure has definitely decreased." The Grass Phantom, as Williams had begun thinking of their savior, continued to work with methodical efficiency. Taliban fighters who had been aggressively maneuvering to flank Team Bravo's positions were now afraid to move, unsure if their next step would be their last. But Morrison could see that the enemy force was regrouping, adapting their tactics to account for the sniper threat. They were using smoke grenades to obscure their movements and coordinating their attacks to come from multiple directions simultaneously. "This is our chance," Morrison decided. "We move to the high ground while they're still confused." "Rodriguez, can you walk?" Rodriguez tested his injured ankle and nodded grimly. "I'll keep up, sir." Hassan was pale, but determined. "I'm good to go, sir. Let's get out of this killing zone." Team Bravo began their movement toward better defensive terrain, using the chaos created by their mysterious ally to mask their advance. The Taliban fighters were still taking casualties from the Phantom Sniper, but they were beginning to organize a more effective response. As they moved, Morrison found himself wondering who their savior might be. The level of skill required for such long-range precision shooting suggested special operations training at the highest level, but he knew of no American assets operating in this area without coordination. The grass continued to move differently where the Phantom walked, and Team Bravo moved with it, using every second of the reprieve they had been given to improve their tactical situation. But they all knew this was just the beginning. The real test was yet to come. The rocky outcrop Team Bravo reached after their desperate movement provided better defensive positions, but Morrison knew it was still a temporary refuge. The Taliban fighters were adapting to the sniper threat with the kind of tactical flexibility that spoke of extensive training and experience. Smoke grenades were beginning to obscure the battlefield, and enemy forces were coordinating their movements in ways that minimized their exposure to long-range fire. Rodriguez had found a position behind a large boulder where he could observe the approaches to their position while keeping weight off his injured ankle. The pain was manageable, but he knew it would slow him down if they needed to move again quickly. He watched through his scope as Taliban fighters used the smoke cover to advance in short bounds, never exposing themselves for more than a few seconds at a time. "They're learning," Rodriguez reported to Morrison. "Professional movement techniques. These aren't local militia." Hassan was propped against a rock wall where Chun could monitor his condition while still maintaining situational awareness. The bullet graze on his arm was more serious than initially assessed, and he was showing early signs of shock despite Chin's best efforts to stabilize him. "Foreign fighters," Hassan said through gritted teeth, his intelligence training allowing him to analyze enemy tactics even while wounded. "Probably Chechens or Arabs. The coordination is too good for local Taliban." Morrison was using his radio to try to establish contact with Parker, Williams, and Chun, who were still pinned down in their Overwatch position. The Taliban had concentrated significant firepower on their location, recognizing that eliminating the Overwatch team would give them freedom of movement to assault the main group. "Parker, what's your status?" Morrison called. Parker's voice came back tense with strain. We're holding, but barely. They got us in a crossfire, and our ammunition is running low. Williams took shrapnel from an RPG, but he's still functional. Williams' voice cut in with characteristic dark humor despite the circumstances. Define functional. I can still blow things up, but I'm leaking a bit more than usual. Chun was dividing his attention between Hassan's wound and the tactical situation developing around them. His medical training had taught him to maintain calm under pressure, but even he was beginning to feel the weight of their deteriorating circumstances. Hassan needs proper medical attention soon, Chun reported to Morrison. I can keep him stable for maybe another hour, but after that, he's going to need more help than I can provide with field supplies. The mysterious sniper was still active, but the Taliban's use of smoke and coordinated movement had reduced the effectiveness of long-range precision fire. Morrison could see muzzle flashes from the ridgeline where their phantom ally was positioned, but the enemy was no longer dropping with the systematic efficiency that had marked the initial engagement. Whoever that shooter is, they're adapting too, Rodriguez observed. Look at the way they're repositioning between shots. They know the Taliban are learning their patterns. Morrison was studying the terrain around their position, looking for alternative routes or defensive advantages they could exploit. The rocky outcrop provided good cover from direct fire, but it also limited their mobility and made them vulnerable to indirect fire weapons like mortars or RPGs. We need to establish contact with our ghost shooter, Morrison decided. If we can coordinate our movements, we might be able to break out of this containment. Hassan struggled to focus despite his weakening condition. Traditional frequencies won't work. If it's special operations, they'll be using encrypted communications we don't have access to. Rodriguez was monitoring Taliban radio chatter through his intercept equipment, and the intelligence he was gathering was increasingly troubling. They're calling in reinforcements. Sounds like at least 2 more squads are moving to our position. The tactical mathematics were becoming impossible. Even with their mysterious allies' assistance, Team Bravo was facing overwhelming odds that were getting worse by the minute. Morrison found himself calculating ammunition expenditure rates against enemy force strength and coming up with equations that had no positive solutions. Williams was preparing his remaining explosives for what he privately believed would be their final stand. His wounded arm was stiffening up, making it difficult to handle the delicate work of setting charges, but his years of experience allowed him to work through the pain. I've got enough C4 left for one good surprise, Williams reported. If they bunch up for an assault, I can make them regret it. Parker was using his communications equipment to send compressed data bursts back to their forward operating base, updating their command structure on the tactical situation and their current status. He knew the information would be valuable for any future operations in the area, even if Team Bravo didn't survive to benefit from it. Base acknowledges our situation, Parker reported. They're trying to get air support released despite the weather, but it's still at least 90 minutes out. 90 minutes might as well have been forever. Morrison was beginning to accept that they were probably going to die in this rocky outcrop, far from home and family, fighting an enemy that had outmaneuvered them at every turn. But accepting the probable outcome didn't mean giving up. SEALs were trained to fight until the last round was fired and the last breath was taken. The Taliban assault came from 3 directions simultaneously, with the kind of coordination that confirmed Hassan's assessment about foreign fighter involvement. Smoke grenades provided concealment for their approach, while suppressive fire kept Team Bravo's heads down and prevented effective defensive shooting. Rodriguez was engaging targets as they appeared through the smoke, but the visibility was so limited that he was essentially shooting at muzzle flashes and movement shadows. Contact front. Multiple targets advancing through the smoke. Morrison was coordinating their defensive fire while trying to maintain radio contact with their Overwatch team. Parker, Williams, Chun, we need immediate support on our position. But the Overwatch team was under heavy assault themselves, with Taliban fighters using the coordinated attack to pressure both SEAL positions simultaneously. Williams was fighting with one good arm, while Chun tried to provide medical support and maintain defensive fire at the same time. "We're fully engaged up here," Parker responded. "They're hitting us with everything they've got." Hassan was struggling to remain conscious as shock began to take hold. But his intelligence training allowed him to recognize patterns in the enemy assault that others might miss. "They're not trying to overrun us," he said weakly. "They're still herding us towards something specific." Morrison realized Hassan was right. Despite their overwhelming advantage, the Taliban fighters were applying pressure to force Team Bravo toward a particular location rather than simply eliminating them with superior firepower. The question was what they would find when they reached whatever destination the enemy had planned for them. Chun was working frantically to stabilize Hassan's condition while bullets chewed chunks from the rocks around their position. "His blood pressure is dropping. We need to get him medical attention or we're going to lose him." Rodriguez was down to his last magazine of ammunition, rationing his shots with the kind of precision that came from years of combat experience. Each bullet had to count, because there might not be another opportunity to resupply. "2 magazines left," Rodriguez reported. "After that, we're down to pistols and harsh language." Williams was calculating the optimal placement for his remaining explosives, trying to determine how to cause maximum disruption to the enemy assault while conserving his limited resources. His wounded arm was making the work more difficult, but his professional pride refused to accept anything less than perfect technique. "I can give us one good boom," Williams said, "but we need to make it count." The Taliban fighters were closing the distance systematically, using professional small unit tactics that spoke of extensive training and experience. They moved with the confidence of soldiers who knew they held every advantage, advancing steadily through the smoke while maintaining coordinated fire support. Morrison was preparing to give the order for Williams to detonate his charges when the impossible happened again. Taliban fighters began dropping from distances that should have been impossible given the smoke and concealment conditions. The mysterious sniper was somehow acquiring targets and engaging them with deadly precision despite the limited visibility that was hampering everyone else on the battlefield. How was he doing that? Rodriguez whispered in amazement as enemy fighters continued to fall with each shot. Chun was staring at the systematic elimination of Taliban positions with the kind of professional appreciation that came from understanding how difficult such shooting really was. Thermal optics, maybe? But even with the best equipment, that level of precision in these conditions is almost supernatural. Hassan managed a weak smile despite his deteriorating condition. Maybe it really is a ghost. The Taliban assault faltered as their carefully coordinated advance dissolved into confusion and panic. Fighters who had been moving with professional discipline suddenly found themselves isolated and exposed, their unit cohesion shattered by the systematic elimination of their leadership elements. Morrison seized the opportunity to re-establish contact with their Overwatch team. "Parker, Williams, Chun. Status report." Williams' voice came back with renewed energy despite his wound. "The pressure just lifted up here. Half their assault team just disappeared in about 30 seconds. Our ghost shooter is earning his pay today." Parker was monitoring Taliban radio communications, and the panic in enemy transmissions was unmistakable. "They're calling for immediate reinforcement and requesting permission to withdraw. Whoever our phantom friend is, he's got them spooked." Rodriguez was watching the enemy positions through his scope, trying to understand the tactical situation that was developing around them. The Taliban fighters who remained were taking cover and avoiding movement, clearly aware that exposure meant death from an enemy they couldn't locate or engage. "This is our chance to break contact," Morrison decided. "We move to better defensive positions while they're still confused." But Hassan, despite his weakening condition, was analyzing the tactical situation with a strategic thinking that made him valuable as an intelligence specialist. "Wait," he said weakly. "This is exactly what they wanted us to do before. What if this is part of the same plan?" Morrison paused, considering Hassan's warning. The Taliban had demonstrated sophisticated tactical thinking throughout the engagement, and it was possible that they were using the sniper threat to manipulate Team Bravo's movements, just as they had used the initial ambush to force them into a predetermined location. Chun was monitoring Hassan's vital signs with growing concern. Whatever we're going to do, we need to do it soon. Hassan's not going to last much longer without proper medical attention. Rodriguez was studying the terrain around their position, looking for movement patterns or positioning that might indicate continued enemy presence. I don't see any Taliban in our immediate area. If we're going to move, this might be our only opportunity. Williams was keeping his remaining explosives ready for immediate use, but his wounded arm was becoming increasingly difficult to manage. My charges are set for remote detonation. If this is a trap, at least we can take some of them with us. Morrison made the decision that would define the next phase of their survival. We move, but we move carefully. Rodriguez, you take point despite that ankle. Hassan, Chun, you're in the middle. I'll bring up the rear and coordinate with the Overwatch team. Team Bravo began their movement with the kind of tactical discipline that had kept them alive through dozens of similar situations. Rodriguez limped but maintained his professional standards, scanning constantly for signs of enemy presence or ambush positions. The mysterious sniper continued to provide overwatch, with enemy fighters dropping whenever they attempted to shadow or intercept Team Bravo's movement. But Morrison was beginning to understand that their phantom ally was more than just an exceptionally skilled marksman. Look at the timing, Morrison said quietly as they moved. Every shot is perfectly coordinated with our movement. Whoever that is, they're not just shooting targets of opportunity. They're providing tactical support. Hassan was being supported by Chun, but his intelligence training allowed him to continue analyzing the situation despite his weakening physical condition. Professional military, probably special operations. But no American unit should be operating in this area without coordination. Rodriguez was navigating terrain that would have been challenging under normal circumstances, but his injured ankle made every step a calculated risk. Could be CIA Special Activities Division. They operate without coordination sometimes. Chun was monitoring Hassan's condition while maintaining situational awareness, his medical training allowing him to multitask effectively even under extreme stress. Blood pressure is stabilizing slightly, but he needs real medical attention soon. Williams was using his good arm to maintain defensive overwatch while moving, his explosives expertise allowing him to identify potential ambush positions and cover approaches that others might miss. Whoever our ghost friend is, they understand our tactical doctrine better than most Americans I've worked with. The movement toward better defensive positions took nearly an hour, with Team Bravo advancing by bounds while their mysterious ally provided continuous overwatch. Taliban fighters attempted to shadow their movement several times, but each attempt resulted in immediate and precise elimination. Morrison was beginning to develop a theory about their phantom sniper, but it was so unlikely that he hesitated to voice it even to himself. The level of skill being demonstrated, combined with the intimate knowledge of SEAL tactical procedures, suggested possibilities that challenged everything he thought he understood about their current situation. Parker's voice crackled over the radio with an update from the Overwatch position. "Sir, we're seeing Taliban reinforcements arriving from the southeast. Looks like at least 15 additional fighters, plus what appears to be crew-served weapons." The tactical situation was deteriorating again despite their temporary respite. Fresh enemy forces were arriving with heavy weapons that could neutralize their defensive advantages and overwhelm even the most skilled sniper support. Rodriguez found a defensive position behind a cluster of large rocks that provided good fields of fire while offering protection from direct assault. "This is as good as it gets, sir. We can see them coming from 3 directions, and there's only one approach they can use without exposing themselves to long-range fire." Hassan was propped against a boulder where Chun could continue treating his wound while maintaining defensive positions. His condition was stable but fragile, and the stress of continued combat was taking its toll on his body's ability to cope with blood loss and shock. "Taliban are regrouping," Hassan reported, his voice weaker but still professional. "They're bringing up mortars. Once they get those in position, our cover won't matter. Morrison was calculating time and distance, trying to determine how long they could hold their position against renewed assault with crew-served weapon support. The mathematics were still impossible, but at least they now had better defensive terrain and the continued support of their mysterious ally. Williams was positioning his remaining explosives to provide maximum defensive benefit, using his expertise to create overlapping fields of destruction that would channel any assault into predetermined killing zones. I can make their approach expensive, but I can't stop them indefinitely. Chun was working with limited medical supplies to keep Hassan stable, but he knew that field medicine could only accomplish so much under combat conditions. Hassan needs evacuation soon, or all this fighting is going to be meaningless. Parker was monitoring both Taliban communications and attempting to coordinate with their forward operating base, but the news from both sources was increasingly grim. Taliban reinforcements are still arriving, and base says weather is still grounding all air support. The afternoon sun was beginning to cast longer shadows across the battlefield, and Morrison realized they had been engaged for over 6 hours with no prospect of extraction or reinforcement. Their ammunition was critically low, Hassan was deteriorating despite Chen's best efforts, and enemy forces were growing stronger with each passing hour. Rodriguez was studying the tactical situation through his scope when he noticed something that made him pause. "Sir, movement on the ridgeline. Our ghost shooter is repositioning again, but this time he's moving toward us instead of maintaining distance." Morrison raised his binoculars and tried to track the movement Rodriguez had spotted. Through the heat shimmer and mountain haze, he could see a figure moving with impossible stealth through terrain that should have provided no concealment whatsoever. Hassan managed to focus despite his weakening condition. Maybe he's running out of ammunition too. Long-range precision shooting consumes a lot of resources. Chen was beginning to understand that their mysterious ally might be in as much trouble as they were. Or maybe he knows something we don't, like incoming indirect fire that's going to make that ridgeline untenable. Williams was watching the systematic approach of Taliban forces with mortars and heavy machine guns, calculating the time remaining before their current position became impossible to defend. Either way, we're about to find out what our phantom friend is really made of. The grass was still moving differently where the ghost walked, but now that movement was coming closer to Team Bravo's position. Whatever happened next would determine whether 6 elite warriors lived to fight another day, or whether they became another casualty statistic in America's longest war. Morrison checked his ammunition one final time and prepared his team for what might be their last stand. But somewhere in the back of his mind, he was beginning to believe that their phantom ally represented something more than just exceptional marksmanship. The grass phantom was coming, and with him came possibilities that challenged everything Team Bravo thought they knew about warfare, loyalty, and the bonds that form between warriors in the world's most dangerous places. The figure that emerged from the tall grass looked like something out of a fever dream. Rodriguez blinked hard, certain that exhaustion and stress were making him hallucinate, but the apparition remained solid and real as it approached their defensive position with movements so fluid they seemed to defy the laws of physics. The man was tall and lean, with the kind of weathered features that spoke of years spent in hostile environments. His clothing was a mixture of local Afghan garments and military equipment, blended together with such skill that he seemed to be part of the landscape itself. What struck Rodriguez most was the man's eyes, pale blue and utterly calm, as if the chaos of the battlefield was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "Team Bravo," the stranger said in accented English, his voice carrying just enough volume to be heard without exposing their position to enemy observation. "I am Dmitry Volkov, formerly Spetsnaz, currently freelance. Your situation is not good." Morrison felt his world shift as he processed this information. A former Soviet Special Forces operator, almost certainly responsible for killing American soldiers during previous conflicts, had just spent the last 6 hours saving their lives. The tactical and political implications made his head spin. Russian, Morrison asked, his weapon still ready but not directly threatening. "What's your interest in keeping us alive?" Dmitri moved with the economical grace of someone who had spent decades perfecting the art of survival in hostile territory. He carried a rifle that Rodriguez recognized as a highly modified Dragunov sniper system, along with equipment that spoke of professional military training at the highest level. "Professional courtesy," Dmitri replied with what might have been a slight smile. "Also, Taliban killed my partner 3 months ago. Enemy of my enemy, as you Americans say." Hassan was struggling to remain conscious, but his intelligence background allowed him to recognize the strategic significance of their situation. A former Spetsnaz operator working against Taliban forces represented intelligence opportunities that could reshape American understanding of the regional conflict. Hassan al-Mahmoud. Hassan introduced himself weakly. "Intelligence specialist. What can you tell us about Taliban operations in this area?" Chun was dividing his attention between Hassan's medical needs and their unexpected visitor, his training as a corpsman making him automatically assess Dmitri for injuries or threatening behavior. What he saw was a professional soldier who moved with the confidence of someone utterly comfortable with violence. "Your friend needs proper medical attention," Dmitri observed, glancing at Hassan's pale complexion and labored breathing. "I have advanced field medical supplies. May I?" Morrison nodded, recognizing that Hassan's survival might depend on accepting help from their unlikely ally. Chun watched carefully as Dmitri produced a medical kit that was far more comprehensive than anything Team Bravo carried, with supplies that suggested extensive trauma experience. Williams was studying their visitor with the kind of professional assessment that came from years of working with explosives and understanding the men who used them. Dmitri carried himself with the relaxed alertness of someone who had survived dozens of similar situations. "Spetsnaz," Williams said appreciatively. "Heard stories about you guys. Nasty reputation for getting things done." Rodriguez was monitoring Taliban positions through his scope while processing the surreal nature of their situation. A Russian Special Forces veteran was treating their wounded teammate while providing tactical advice based on months of operating against the same enemy forces. "Taliban reinforcements are still moving into position," Rodriguez reported. "Looks like they're setting up mortars about 800 meters to the southeast." Dmitri was working on Hassan's wound with the kind of clinical efficiency that spoke of extensive battlefield medical experience. His movements were precise and confident, suggesting knowledge that went far beyond basic first aid training. "Mortars will begin firing in approximately 15 minutes, Dmitri said without looking up from his work. "They are ranging the position now. We need to move before they establish proper firing solutions." Parker was attempting to re-establish contact with the Overwatch team while processing the intelligence implications of their situation. A former Soviet Special Forces operator represented both opportunities and risks that would require careful handling by intelligence professionals. "Parker, Williams, Chun, do you copy?" Morrison called through his radio. Williams' voice came back strained but functional. "We copy, sir." Still pinned down, but the pressure has decreased significantly. "Are we seeing things, or is there someone else shooting at the Taliban?" Morrison looked at Dmitri, who nodded slightly. "Affirmative. We have an ally. Former Russian Special Forces, currently working against Taliban interests." The silence that followed this announcement spoke volumes about the complexity of their situation. American and Russian Special Forces had been enemies for decades, but the realities of asymmetric warfare in Afghanistan created strange alliances and unexpected partnerships. Chun was observing Dmitri's medical technique with professional interest. "Where did you train?" "That's advanced trauma management. Military Medical Academy in St. Petersburg, then field experience in Chechnya, Georgia, Syria," Dmitri replied while continuing to work on Hassan's wound. "Combat medicine is universal language." Hassan was regaining some strength as Dmitri's advanced medical supplies began to take effect, but his intelligence training made him curious about their allies' background and motivations. What brings a former Spetsnaz operator to Afghanistan? Dmitri paused in his medical work, his pale eyes focusing on something in the distance that none of them could see. Long story. Short version. Government contract work after military service. Partner, and I were tracking high-value targets for private clients. Rodriguez was beginning to understand the implications of what Dmitri was telling them. Mercenary work, corporate security, maybe some government contracts that don't officially exist. Morrison was calculating the tactical advantages of cooperation against the political complexities of working with a former enemy. Your partner, the one the Taliban killed. What happened? Dmitri resumed working on Hassan's wound, but his voice carried an edge that spoke of personal loss and professional anger. Ambush, similar to what you experienced today, but my partner was not as lucky as you. Taliban took him alive. The meaning of those words hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. Everyone present understood what Taliban forces did to captured special operations personnel, and the knowledge created a bond of shared understanding that transcended national boundaries. Williams was monitoring enemy movements while processing the personal dynamics of their situation. So this is payback for you. Professional and personal. Da Dmitri confirmed. Taliban in this region are led by foreign fighters. Chechens, Arabs, some Europeans. They understand special operations tactics because they learned from fighting against Russian forces. Chen had finished assisting with Hassan's medical treatment and was studying their tactical situation with renewed hope. Hassan's condition was stabilizing, and they had gained an ally with extensive knowledge of enemy capabilities and local terrain. Taliban mortars are almost ready, Dmitri announced, checking his watch with the kind of timing precision that came from years of coordinating indirect fire. We have perhaps 10 minutes before this position becomes untenable. Morrison was developing an extraction plan that took advantage of their new intelligence and capabilities, but it required trusting someone who had been trained to kill American soldiers. What do you suggest? Dmitri was studying the terrain around their position with the kind of tactical analysis that came from extensive experience in similar situations. There's a valley approximately 2 kilometers north of here, deep enough to provide protection from indirect fire, with water and concealment. Rodriguez was skeptical about moving Hassan in his current condition, but he recognized that staying in their current position meant certain death when the mortars began firing. Can Hassan make that distance? Hassan managed a weak but determined smile. I'll make it. Better to die moving than die sitting still. Chan was preparing his medical kit for movement, organizing supplies to provide continued treatment during their extraction. The advanced trauma care Dmitri provided bought us time, but Hassan still needs professional medical attention. Parker's voice crackled over the radio with urgent information about Taliban preparations. Sir, enemy mortar teams are setting up firing positions. I count at least 3 tubes, maybe more. Morrison made the decision that would define their survival. All positions prepare to move. We're extracting to the North Valley with our new ally. Parker, Williams, Chun, can you reach our position? Williams responded with characteristic determination despite his wound. We're moving now, sir. Taliban seem to be focused on their mortar setup, so we got a window. Dmitri was preparing his own equipment for movement, organizing his gear with the kind of efficiency that spoke of decades of similar extractions under hostile conditions. I will provide overwatch during your movement. Taliban will focus on mortar fire, not pursuit initially. Rodriguez was helping Hassan prepare for movement while maintaining defensive observation of their immediate area. Movement in the south. Looks like Taliban are positioning for assault once mortars soften us up. The coordinated extraction began with the kind of precision that only came from professional military training. Dmitri moved to an overwatch position where he could provide sniper support, while Team Bravo prepared Hassan for transportation over difficult terrain. Morrison was coordinating their movement through radio communication while maintaining tactical awareness of the developing enemy assault. Move in bounds. Rodriguez, your point despite that ankle. Chun, Hassan, your center. I'll coordinate with Overwatch. The first mortar rounds impacted their previous position just as Team Bravo cleared the immediate area, sending rock fragments and debris flying through the space they had occupied moments before. Dimitri's timing had been perfect, saving their lives with intelligence that came from understanding Taliban tactical procedures. Hassan was managing the movement better than expected, drawing strength from the advanced medical treatment and the hope of eventual extraction. Dimitri was right about the timing. Taliban mortar procedures are predictable if you understand Soviet training doctrine. Chun was monitoring Hassan's condition while maintaining situational awareness during their movement. Blood pressure is holding steady. The Russians' medical supplies are better than anything we carry. Rodriguez was navigating terrain that challenged his injured ankle, but his years of training allowed him to maintain professional standards despite the physical difficulty. Overwatch is maintaining perfect positioning. Our Russian friend knows what he's doing. Williams, Parker, and Chun from the Overwatch team were moving parallel to the main group, using terrain features to mask their movement, while Dimitri provided coordinated sniper support for both elements. The tactical coordination was seamless despite the language and cultural barriers. Taliban are confused by our movement pattern, Parker reported. They're shifting mortar fire, but they're hitting empty positions. Dimitri was demonstrating why Spetsnaz had earned their fearsome reputation, moving through terrain with impossible stealth while maintaining precision fire on Taliban positions. His shooting was so accurate that enemy forces were afraid to expose themselves long enough to coordinate effective pursuit. Morrison was beginning to understand that their mysterious ally represented more than just exceptional marksmanship skills. Dimitri was coordinating their extraction with the kind of tactical sophistication that suggested extensive experience in similar operations. How long have you been operating in this region? Morrison asked during a brief pause in their movement. 18 months, Dimitri replied, while maintaining observation of their back trail. Since my partner and I accepted contract to eliminate Taliban leadership, I know this terrain better than most locals. Hassan was regaining strength as the advanced medical treatment continued to take effect, his intelligence training allowing him to appreciate the strategic implications of their situation. 18 months of intelligence on Taliban operations. That's invaluable information. Chun was treating their movement as a mobile medical evacuation, providing continued care for Hassan while adapting to the tactical requirements of their extraction. Hassan's condition is stable. The Russian medical supplies are making the difference. Williams was maintaining defensive overwatch while processing the personal dynamics of their unlikely partnership. Never thought I'd owe my life to a former Spetsnaz operator. Rodriguez was studying Dimitri's tactical movement with professional appreciation. Politics aside, the man knows his business. Best fieldcraft I've seen outside of SEAL training. The valley Dimitri had identified proved to be everything he had promised. Deep enough to provide protection from indirect fire, with a small stream that would provide water, and thick vegetation that would conceal their positions from aerial observation. This will do, Morrison announced as they reached the valley floor. Defensive positions, medical attention for Hassan, and coordination with base for extraction. Dimitri was establishing an overwatch position that commanded the approaches to their valley while remaining concealed from enemy observation. Taliban will need approximately 2 hours to locate this position. Enough time for your extraction assets to arrive. Parker was working frantically to re-establish communication with their forward operating base, using their improved position to boost signal strength and data transmission capabilities. Base, this is Team Bravo. We have reached defensive positions and require immediate extraction. The response came back with the kind of urgency that suggested their situation had attracted command attention at the highest levels. Team Bravo, extraction assets are airborne despite weather conditions. Estimate arrival in 90 minutes. Chan was setting up a proper medical treatment area where he could provide Hassan with the kind of care that had been impossible during their movement and combat operations. Hassan's condition is stable, but he needs hospital care. Dimitri's medical intervention bought us the time we needed. Hassan was conscious and alert for the first time in hours, his intelligence training making him curious about their allies' background and future plans. Dmitry, what happens after we extract? Will you continue operating against Taliban forces? Dmitry was maintaining overwatch while responding to Hassan's questions, his pale eyes constantly scanning for signs of enemy pursuit or preparation for assault. Contract work continues until Taliban leadership is eliminated or my clients decide mission parameters have changed. Rodriguez was establishing communications with their approaching extraction assets, providing tactical information about landing zones and enemy capabilities in the area. Extraction birds will need to be aware of Taliban mortars and possible small arms fire during pickup. Morrison was beginning to understand that their encounter with Dmitry represented opportunities that extended far beyond their immediate survival. A former Spetsnaz operator with extensive knowledge of Taliban operations and proven hostility toward enemy forces could provide intelligence advantages that might reshape American tactical procedures in the region. Would you consider coordination with American forces? Morrison asked carefully. Information sharing, tactical cooperation against common enemies? Dmitry considered this question while maintaining his defensive observation, understanding the implications of what Morrison was suggesting. Professional cooperation is possible, but I work for private clients, not governments. Williams was monitoring Taliban radio communications through intercept equipment, gathering intelligence about enemy response to their extraction and plans for future operations. Taliban are calling this a major defeat. They lost over 20 fighters and failed to capture any prisoners. The sound of approaching helicopters began to echo through the mountain valley, the distinctive rotor signature of American extraction assets providing hope that their ordeal was finally coming to an end. But Morrison knew that their encounter with the Grass Phantom was just the beginning of a much larger story. Chun was preparing Hassan for medical evacuation, organizing documentation of his injuries, and treatment for transfer to military medical personnel. Hassan stable for transport. Hospital care should have him back to full strength in a few weeks. Parker was coordinating with the extraction assets, providing updated tactical information about enemy capabilities and the presence of their unexpected ally. Extraction assets are requesting information about the unidentified sniper who provided support. Morrison looked at Dmitry, understanding that their encounter had created relationships and opportunities that would extend far beyond the immediate tactical situation. The choice is yours. Extract with us or continue your mission independently. Dmitry smiled for the first time since joining them, his pale eyes reflecting something that might have been satisfaction or anticipation. My mission continues here, but perhaps our paths will cross again. Rodriguez was providing security for the landing zone while processing the surreal nature of their rescue by a former enemy who had become an unlikely ally. Strange war when Russians are saving American lives. Hassan managed to focus despite his medical condition, his intelligence training recognizing the historical significance of their encounter. Not the first time, probably won't be the last. War makes strange partnerships. The extraction helicopters settled into the valley with the kind of precision that spoke of extensive experience in hostile environments. Medical personnel immediately began treating Hassan while Team Bravo prepared for extraction under Dmitry's continued overwatch. Morrison took a moment to shake hands with the man who had saved their lives, understanding that their encounter represented something larger than tactical cooperation. Dmitry Volkov, we won't forget what you did today. Marcus Morrison, Dmitry replied, using Morrison's first name in a gesture of personal respect. Perhaps we work together again someday. Chun was coordinating Hassan's medical evacuation while maintaining awareness of their tactical situation. Medical team says Hassan will make a full recovery. The Russians' field medicine saved his life. Williams was documenting their encounter for intelligence purposes while preparing his own evacuation. Story for the grandchildren. Assuming anyone believes it. Rodriguez took one final look at the Grass Phantom who had materialized from the Afghan mountains to save their lives, understanding that some encounters transcended politics and national boundaries. See you around, Dmitri. Parker was uploading their tactical reports and intelligence assessments to base while preparing for extraction. Command is very interested in debrief about our mysterious ally. As the helicopters lifted off from the valley floor, Morrison watched Dmitri disappear back into the tall grass with the same impossible stealth that had first brought him to their attention. The grass moved differently where the Phantom walked, and Morrison knew they had witnessed something that would reshape their understanding of warfare and loyalty. Hassan was stabilized and receiving proper medical care. Team Bravo was intact and returning to base, and somewhere in the Afghan mountains, a former enemy continued his private war against forces that threatened them all. The grass phantom had appeared when death seemed certain, provided salvation when hope was lost, and disappeared back in a legend with the same mysterious grace that had first brought him to their attention. Rodriguez would later tell his daughters about the day when politics and nationality meant nothing compared to professional respect and shared courage. Williams would remember the moment when enemies became allies through mutual recognition of shared values. Chin would carry the memory of advanced medical techniques that saved a teammate's life. Morrison would think often about the pale blue eyes that had seen too much death but still chose to preserve life when it mattered most. And Hassan would spend his intelligence career building bridges between former enemies who had learned to recognize their common humanity. In the end, Team Bravo had learned that the grass moves differently when a phantom walks through it. And sometimes the most unlikely saviors emerge from the most unexpected places. The war continued, but their faith in the bonds that unite professional warriors had been forever strengthened by their encounter with the grass phantom of Afghanistan. The legend of Dmitry Volkov would grow in the telling, but those who lived through that day would always know that some stories are true in ways that transcend ordinary understanding. The grass phantom was real, and his legacy would endure long after the wars ended and the warriors went home.